Hi to everybody in that land. Hi to the folks who are here. Welcome to the first workshop in a long time. Since the pandemic. We haven't done one in forever. I'm Jim Goodman, so I'm that guy. And I'm kind of being the MC tonight, and I will have a segment as well. Tonight, we're going to talk about probably what we see here at the Accelerator, which I'm an advisor and mentor at, as well as some others who are on the screen with us. We'll talk tonight. We're talking about technical talent tonight, finding a CTO or a technical co-founder, building a team, how to do it, where to do it, who do you do it with. We find that this is probably one of the most brought up topics over the years that I've been here from pretty much every startup. So with that, let's roll into it. I'll tell you who's going to be talking tonight, give you a little blurb about them, and then we'll get started. So we've got 3 presentations this evening. We're going to start with Tony, who is a part-time CTO for various companies. He also, his claim to fame is he was the founding CTO of eHarmony. So if you've gotten a date on eHarmony, it's Tony's fault. So he's also worked with, way too many A-list companies to even mention or list. He also runs the LA CTO group, which is the largest group of CTOs in the country. So obviously knows his stuff there. So Tony's going to be talking about how to find a CTO, where to find them, how to nab them, or a technical co-founder. As I said, I'm Jim Goodman. My fault is I'm the founder of Ticketmaster Online and then single digit employee at tickets.com. So I'm the reason that you pay a $20 service charge on a $14 ticket. I apologize. Also spent a little time at Intel and most recently lived in Asia running large teams for a large family private office. So have worked outsourced over the years and then was boots on the ground living in Asia, working with a lot of outsourcers who weren't outsourcers because I was there. So it was interesting to see it live. So I'll be talking about building the team, what you need to look for, and how to put that together. And then we've got Steve Burns. And Steve Burns, I've worked with for a number of years now, who's fantastic. He lives in Manila. Travels regularly to go see his clients. Just got back to Manila here from the United States from seeing clients. And Steve's background is varied, including being the British Chamber of Commerce in the Philippines head, as well as now he runs a bespoke, what's called a BPO, an outsourcing office here in the United States, as we would call it, in Manila. And they're probably one of the best around, hands down, and have a wonderfully refreshing take on how to outsource and deal with that kind of stuff. So there are blurbs. That's a little bit about us. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Tony to start, and he can talk to you about how to find a CTO.
Sounds great. So we lost the picture with the attendees. I was actually going to use. Oops! Did I just lose my screen share? Let me try that again. Hang on 1 second.
It's always the technical guys who have the most technical problems.
Yeah, come to find out, I can't. Let's see. Can I figure out how to get both my presentation going and be able to see people? So try one more time.
There you go.
Oh, there we go. Okay, now I got it. So what I was actually hoping to do here, so I talk to about 100 startup founders a year. I'm very involved with a couple different, mentorship programs, and because I've been involved in the LA CTO community for so long, I talk to a lot of startup founders who are all having challenges with finding technical co-founders. So today, literally a few hours ago. I talked to a founder who's got the very standard challenge of, hey, I've got a concept here and I need to find a technical co-founder. And so what I was thinking might be fun to do, but I'm not sure logistically if we're going to be able to work this out, is I could give you a very quick version of this if we had a founder here who was looking for a co-founder, and we could just kind of go through standard questions I'd ask you and kind of narrow it down and give a little bit of context for this. Would that work out? Is there somebody that would be willing to volunteer?
Anybody want to volunteer to answer these questions for Tony as a founder?
I guess I'll do it, but I'll fake it.
You'll fake it? Well, no, if this isn't relevant for folks, that's okay. I could just tell you kind of what the conversation is. But if there was somebody there looking for a technical co-founder, then I could take it through and we kind of drill down real quick into how the conversation would go.
I can try, but I am right now in the pre-napkin stage, so it's going to be very general. The idea is to have tenders for electric locomotives, tenders with batteries or other storage devices.
Okay.
That you have a locomotive, and then you attach the tender or whatever number of tenders that you need to carry you through a long distance where there is no overhead catenary that provides the power for the locomotive and obviously the train.
Okay.
I do have electrical engineering training, but it's not my specialty. So I have general knowledge, but not the specifics.
Okay.
And of course, the goal is to develop that basically tender along with the attachments in the locomotive.
Okay.
Would be then put into use by the railroads. Current status, it's, as I said, pre-napkin, so there is nothing going on other than whatever is in my head. So far, I have not had any customer feedback except what I have learned, that currently in California there is a program, or if you will, one of the railroads runs trains with 3 diesels and 1 electric locomotive. Okay. But it is on limited basis, I think 270 miles or something like that, which does not carry you through the desert to, say, Phoenix or onward all the way to, say, Houston.
Okay.
I have no advisors at the moment, and I have 0 budget.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much for sharing that. So by the way, I'm a software guy. So what I would end up doing out of our conversation is saying, okay, let me see if I know somebody who could help you with the specifics of what you're dealing with. One thing I would comment on always is if you've not captured, so in the software land, wireframes and specs, here, I'm not sure exactly what the equivalent would be, but some sort of description of what the offering would be so that you can go out and get more customer feedback. Obviously, it's challenging to get in a room, but on the other hand, if they've really got the pain, then getting the feedback on it so that you'll have a sense of whether you've really got a market. You want to do as much of that up front as you can to avoid building something that ends up, not being the right solution. It's very common for founders to go off and ask somebody to go build something, but then, come to find out as soon as they show them the screen, it's like, oh, that's not really what I wanted. And of course, you could have avoided that by showing them, screens ahead of time, right? You can fake all that stuff. In your case, it would be sort of a concept model, a description of it, but getting customer feedback early prior to doing anything is definitely a challenge. So the other thing I think you said was you didn't have a technical advisor. I'm going to talk about that. And having no budget for development means, you're going to have to get a bunch of customer feedback. hopefully get some help from an advisor or whatever, and then you're gonna have to raise capital for that. That one actually sounds like an expensive one. So that's really quick kinds of questions that I'll roll through, and then we'll hone in on a few key ones. So let me talk about what always turns up here. And again, I'm thinking software. So web, mobile, enabled kind of systems, and technical advisors are people who will spend a few hours a month with you, and they will evaluate what you're doing from a technology standpoint and give you advice on how do I pursue this. So that very quick conversation that I just talked about having, which generally would last 30 minutes to an hour with a founder, a technical advisor can go through that in much more detail and give you advice on a lot of stuff. Now, it's advisory. They're not going to roll up the sleeves. They're not going to build anything or design anything. They're actually quite easy to get a hold of. The reason is a CTO can do this on the side, and they don't have to give up their job. There's no real risk to it. And there's also some agreements out there, like the FAST agreements from Founders Institute. So if you go to fi.co or search for fi.co FAST agreement, you can see how to, here's a pre-made agreement. Here's how much equity you'd have to give them. And I think every web mobile startup needs a technical advisor. The founder we just talked to could definitely use a technical advisor to say, what's the reality of this? What's the cost going to be? Anything from an integration standpoint, et cetera. A part-time CTO is, I've been doing this now for 25 years as a part-time CTO. So doing 3-4 startups at a time. And basically you own all of the responsibilities of a CTO to understand, what we need to build, how we're going to build it, what the team will look like. But a CTO generally is a pretty strategic person. And what you really need in a startup is a lot of developers and a little bit of strategy. And so the part-time CTO will roll up their sleeves, get stuff built. But honestly, if you hire somebody as a CTO out of the gate, they're going to do a little bit of strategy at the start, and then they'd either be able to better be in getting coding going, which they're probably not great at both, or they're just not that busy. So again, part-time CTOs are actually, technical advisors the easiest to find. Part-time CTOs, not too bad to find, although it's cash heavy. And developers are relatively hard to find, especially if you're looking out for them on an equity basis. And these days, they've got so many different options and you get paid a lot of money. So to me, for most startups, they need to be thinking about paying the developers at this point. And so you could maybe do a partnership with an offshore contract firm, and maybe they'll be willing to do a deal with you. It might cost you very little. You give up some equity. But if you're going to go that route, you better have a part-time CTO making sure that they're building the right stuff. So, so again, you want to figure out exactly what you need. And there are different models for how you can slice this. I'd say the other key is, we already talked about it, go out and do customer interviews, do as much as you can without coding. You might want to stick a WordPress kind of site up and see, can you convert people? There's a lot you can do before you ask a developer to go write code to prove out some early models. Get creative with that stuff because, again, coding is, expensive and hard to change. So, learn as much as you can without doing any coding, and definitely have your technical advisor review what you're planning to do. In terms of finding a technical co-founder, the places that, I used to have a longer list of this. If you go out to my blog, the SoCal CTO blog, I used to have a list of like 8 places you'd go and look for technical co-founders. With COVID, way harder. And gosh, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Not sure where that's coming from, but in any case, so the number one by far is LinkedIn. So the founder today, you know, there's probably not going to be that many people that are expert in that area, and you could probably search for people who would have expertise in that. Literally today, the startup founder that I talked to, who had a software initiative, it was like, okay, here's how you could go search for people on LinkedIn. Again, you're looking for people who are likely fully engaged somewhere else. They might be related companies, and they'd be willing to take on a side project. And so it's going to take a lot of work to do, but it's a great way to go potentially find resources. Plan to spend a lot of hours on it though. Talk to a lot of people. You'll get a lot of no's, but it only takes one. The other place you can still go is there's lots of tech-oriented meetups out there, and there's also online communities for various techs. So if you know a particular technology that would be part of it, part of your solution, you can go look for those tech meetups and try to find technical co-founders there. Okay, now you're going to have a conversation with a technical person. And I'll say today, this afternoon, when I had the conversation with the startup founder, well, he did a great job selling his business opportunity to me. You always want to convince the person that it's a big opportunity, an interesting market. Here's what the competitive landscape. Here's why we're unique. Here's why I'm an expert as the founder in it. But tell me enough that I am convinced it's worth my time. I need to know that. I need to know that there's a real opportunity to have a success. Otherwise, I'm not going to spend time just because I've got plenty of opportunities. The second thing is you certainly want to sound as ready to develop as you can, meaning that in an ideal world, you've got wireframes and specs that have been taken out to customers and been vetted. And it's like, yeah, that's definitely, we'll use that the moment you've got it to be available. The farther you are along that curve, the higher the confidence level will be of the technical person. If in my conversation this afternoon, the founder was talking about a bunch of technology that he might want to use as part of it, and there's all of these different challenges, and he's not sure how it's going to get pulled together, and it just got more and more complicated as you go and less organized. And so as a technical person, that's just risk. It can all get figured out, but when you go to talk to a technical person, the more you make it sound like it's a total mess, the less they'll feel like, hey, I'm going to be successful in this. So you want it to be pretty far along, they're ready to develop, and it's been vetted with customers. Then you also, while it's pretty ready to develop, you do want to talk about the interesting technical challenges that come along with it. Here's as you as I'm a technical person, I'm a problem solver first and foremost. So I'd like to hear, kind of why this would be interesting to work on. So it's doable, but it's something we'll have to figure out this and this and this, right? And that gets me excited. I don't want to hear, actually, if you look down at the trigger words, don't ever say it's just this, it's simple. I'd also avoid the term easy to use, meaning I want to build a system that's easy to use, because that sounds, it's really easy to say. Implementing that is, like, why isn't everybody Apple? Because that really takes strong design chops. That's not something that a technical person is going to bring to bear. And so that's a trigger for most technical people. We'll differentiate ourselves based on how easy we are to use. Well, that's the technical person, that sounds dubious. And I think if you know your interesting technical challenge, ideally you've got an interesting technical question, so that way when you start talking to the technical person, you can ask their advice on this technical question. How would you approach blah, right? And it doesn't have to be the biggest, most thorny technical question. It's got to be enough to kind of get them on the hook, because again, if you've got a great business opportunity and a question we can help you with, we're happy to talk to you. We love talking about technical stuff, and here's somebody I can help. I'd say in the avoid category, in addition to simple or just, don't sell or talk too much when you're talking to a technical person. You are going to tell them why it's a great business opportunity, but you definitely want to just give the basics down, get into then the status of it. Here's an interesting question for you, and then stop at that point and try to get the technical person to talk. I've been in situations, networking meetings where, well, like I'm doing right now, just talking way, way, way too much, right? And the technical person on the other side will not appreciate that. For most of us, it's kind of overwhelming to have all those words flying at you, and you end up turning off. So I know I just went through a lot of stuff. You're going to hear more presentations. I guess any questions on any of this? I think that's it for my quick hit thing.
I have a question, Tony.
Sure.
When trying to onboard a CTO, what is the best way to go about it? Do you recommend giving some sort of salary and equity? Do you recommend, how do you recommend structuring that type of relationship or partnership if you don't want to give a percentage of your company away?
Well, if you don't want to give a percentage of the company away, then you're going to need, cash to pay. Basically, most CTOs, early CTOs, are going to be looking for an equity stake or some kind of revenue upside. Based on the profitability of the company, that they would share in it, because you want to feel like you're part of the company. So I'd say the more common thing is you are giving up equity in it, so that you're aligned directly with the founder. But if you're not going to give up equity, then it's a cash, possibly some incentives.
The only other concern is the developers. How do I make sure we're legally protected and long term they will stay loyal and they won't code in a way where if our relationship breaks apart, I could take that and then have someone else work on the same project using the same code without having to restart all over again and waste a lot of money?
Yeah, so the great question. Thank you for asking that. So well, two things. One, you're sitting in a good office there, so you've got
Yes.
Stubbs Alderton who can help with the legal side of it, right?
Yes.
And certainly you want appropriate agreements with everybody you work with. I have seen so many founders that do not have control of their credentials and access to all the code and own those things. And you get in there and they're having challenges with the current developers. And then it's like, well, the developer's got a gun to your head because they can just, never give you the source code, or they can shut down your systems or whatever. And even if you are, have the right to have access to all of that, it's still, if you haven't had the credentials along the way, you'll have a tough time. So you always want to make sure you've got the credentials. And again, a technical advisor, which generally doesn't cost you cash, costs you equity, but it sounds like you'd want something different in terms of relationship, or a part-time CTO, or whatever, a trusted technical source, technical person can ensure that, hey, look, I've got all the credentials, etc., and then could turn off access. Trying to prevent a developer from having a copy of your source code and going off and doing something nefarious with it is, it's hard to stop the copying, but you can try to squash competitive threat. I would say though that there are geographies in the world where they have a different view of all of that. So you might also consider that as part of it.
All right.
Tony, I wanted to, did I cut you off?
No, I was just gonna say thank you so much, Tony.
Sure.
I was gonna add to your list of where you would meet CTOs.
Okay.
I find I meet them at hackathons a lot,
And
Great call.
I meet them at AWS and Google when we have conferences. So I meet a lot of new people and socialize with those groups. So I thought you might want to add those in for the people here, that if you attend those sort of things, like AWS has summits and things like that. So for me,
yeah, I hadn't thought of the AWS and Google. The hackathon was on my list before. I took it off because I haven't been to an in-person hackathon in a long time. And so maybe they're really sparked up way more than I'm thinking, but that used to be a great place because you will find technical people who are often there with very bad business ideas, but are very interested in starting a business. So that was an excellent point. And thank you for contributing that.
Anybody else? Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
hi.
Please.
Yeah, hi. My name is Pablo. I'm asking my question remote. For products, software products that ride on top of another platform, like for instance, the Adobe ecosystem. So products for Photoshop, Illustrator, Final Cut, After Effects. What type of CTO would be a good person to look for?
So I'm not familiar with the Adobe environment, but in the Salesforce world, there are definitely lots of people who have done deep integrations with Salesforce and or tooling on top of Salesforce. And so what you really are going to do, in my head, what I would be doing is just going through and either looking for interesting companies and then going and finding their technical people. The longer they've been around, the more likely that there have been some early technical people that maybe have left the company or whatever, or they maybe have had an exit and you can look for somebody there. The other thing you can do is just search for the key terms. So the Adobe ecosystem, I don't know enough, but with Salesforce, there are very specific technical terms that go along with building out the applications, the integration layer, et cetera. And most technical people will put some level of that kind of detail in their profile because they want to be found, right?
Right.
And so if you just search for those keyword terms, you can find people who've worked on something related to it. Again, ideally, you're looking for people who have startup experience, though, because if they're at some large company doing that stuff, they may or may not be interested in startups, and they may or may not be particularly great, especially early stage of startup.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Beautiful. Anybody else? Cool. Okay. I guess it's my turn now, and I'm going to be talking to you a bit about actually building the teams. How do you do it? What do you need to look for, and where do you find them? And hold on. Help if I put my glasses on so I can find what I need.
I'm rooting for you to have a technical challenge like I did.
There you go. Hold on.
Dang.
There we go.
Oh, you got it
Ta-da.
on the first try. Okay, now you're making me look bad.
Sorry. Obviously Tony's smarter than me. I'm luckier than he is. So there we have it. As Tony mentioned, the first question when building a team is, especially for a startup, right off the bat. Hold on, we haven't gotten here yet. There's another question before this slide. And that's really, can you pay them? Okay. It's going to make a huge difference in what you can do, how you do it, how you go about doing it, whether you can pay them or not. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is based on if you can actually pay them, even if it's a small amount. You get what you pay for, basically, as is the case in most things in life. So a whole lot easier to find folks if you can pay them. If not, you might have to sell a kidney. I'm going to delve into finding folks. Really, you're looking at 4 ways to pretty much get folks. You've got local talent, in-house. You've got off-site, which would be, say, an agency here in town. You've got nearshore, which would be relatively close, but you're not going to see them all the time. Like maybe your folks are in Canada, or they might be in New York, or something like that. And then you've got offshore. All of them have pluses and minuses. Obviously, in-house here in the US, wow, that's going to be costly. You've got, go take a look at comparably at Glassdoor, try to find high-end talent that knows what they're doing for a startup. And, these guys are, for juniors these days, you're talking about high five figures. If you need a senior developer, you're talking about six figures without batting an eye. So that's, plus benefits, plus a good office environment, plus. So, these guys know what they're valued at and what they've got. Here in the local market, you've also got the problem of, look, restaurants are having trouble finding wait staff. So imagine trying to find a developer locally. There are lots of jobs. They are very wanted, so you're competing and you've got a relatively small pool compared to the whole world. Okay. Also, one of the things that a lot of startups do here in order to get going is they use an agency. An agency may be anything from an advertising agency that has a number of developers to a development agency. It's a great way to do a proof of concept, kind of. I personally am not a big fan of it. They tend to be very expensive. They usually charge anywhere from 50 to 100% over what they are paying their employees. You don't always get the same employee. It's a rotation. It's a pain in the butt. And even more importantly, as a startup, when you go out looking for funding, if you're only using an agency, good luck. Investors do not like that. They're going to frown upon it. And you got to have something more permanent than just spending through the nose for dev talent. So that's where you stand on what you've got. And obviously, I tend to, and many startups, you usually, as Tony said, you'll have a technical advisor, you'll have a part-time CTO, and that part-time CTO might find you talent elsewhere. That's what Tony does. That's what I do. Okay. So we're going to delve into a lot more on offshore, because offshore is what is actually affordable for startups. You've got great talent pools. You can work them at various hours and you can go all over the world. So if you need more than one and you need 24-hour service, you can leapfrog and always be busy and always be working on things. So, okay. Slide number 2. That's the definition of outsourcing. We all kind of know what it is. This is the old model of outsourcing. People used to define it into its sections: BPOs, AMOs, SDOs, et cetera, et cetera. These days, the only thing that really matters is a BPO, okay? And that's the business processing office, what we here in the United States call offshore. And that's really the only one that matters, because that's where we lump everything into these days. Because things like SDOs, as I'll show you in just a second, they've gone the way of the dinosaur, and I'll tell you in just a moment. So a BPO, a business processing officer outsourcing, it can be one-to-one. It can be one-to-many. So you'll find, and you're going to go out, you're going to look for folks, and there are tons of these folks out there. Welcome to everything from, a bespoke outsourcing service, like you're going to hear from Steve in a moment, all the way through, I guess you could probably consider even things like Indeed, or what used to be various websites where you put your stuff up and next thing you know, everybody from India and Pakistan is responding and saying, I can build that for 57 cents. Again, I'm back to, you're going to get what you pay for. Okay. So you'll find folks that are willing to work with you one-on-one. And on the other end of the spectrum, you're going to find outsourcing folks who are very familiar in certain veins and have done it a million times. And they've got things that are what for them is cookie cutter because they've done it a million times before, because that's their niche that they build for and they design. So they'll be able to get you up and running relatively quickly, but know that that code might be used by somebody else too, because the underlying code, the underpinnings, because it may be something like the Adobe question that came up. It might be somebody who's very familiar with Adobe. So they use chunks of code. It's like Lego for them, okay? In the AMO, application management, that really has been rolled into BPOs, because if you're hiring software engineers, most of the time software engineers are going to take care of all of this for you now, and those aren't segregated anymore. Okay, so see, we're going to fly through a couple slides here. And the SEO service, this really doesn't exist anymore at all, because this is what Amazon AWS does. This is what the Google Cloud does. This is back in the old days when you needed people to actually monitor machines and run machines. And again, when you're dealing with a BPO, if you hire intelligently, you're actually going to be getting folks who fit your needs. So you're not going to just get a developer who knows a particular language. You're going to be hiring a DevOps guy. So somebody who can manage and run your AWS cloud services for you as well. So that's all included there. So here's a really old slide showing you that we're going that way. And it's so old that you can see it comes from Forrester Research, which I don't believe actually even exists anymore. So, but we all know that it's trending and everybody is going to outsourcing because it's where it's at. Okay. So why do you want to outsource? Well, access the best-in-class business processes. Like I mentioned before, you've got a much bigger pool to pull from when you're outsourcing, because you got the opportunity to not just pull from one source, but if you need a specialty that may come from a certain area, you can go there. You can run multiple places. You can have multiple outsourcers. So you've got a larger pool than what's just available to you locally or what's just available to you, say, at an agency. Especially, again, I'm going to go back to the Adobe question. Does the agency have anybody who knows how to build that Adobe plugin? Probably not. Okay. You get to harness leading technologies. You've got developers all over the world who, look, we're geeks. We sit in a dark room and we build stuff. And we have hobbies, and our hobbies usually end up being sitting in a dark room and building stuff. Okay. So, we go down a rabbit hole for everything. And this is how, crypto was invented, because we sat in a dark room and we built stuff. You get increased efficiencies, as I mentioned earlier, that you get different time zones, you get larger teams, you've got a better cost structure, you have better capabilities, you've got expanded service, again, round the clock. So you can do something here locally with a small team, you can throw it over the wall to a team that's 12 or 16 hours ahead and come in the next morning and do a handoff. So you've got a result coming back to you. So you're really literally working around the clock 24/7. Well, 24 hours a day. Some societies are 7, some like ours are 5. And I know some developers who are lazy and 5 is generous. You also get to expand service, enrich customer relations, because remember, these outsourcing folks, sure, we're talking about developers, but outsourcers can usually find you other people as well. So do you need data entry? Great, no problem. Do I want to pay you $15 an hour to do data entry here in the United States? No, not worth it. But over in other countries where the economies are different, you can get data entry at a much lower cost. You need accounting services because you are running an accounting startup. These things are available elsewhere, oftentimes through outsourcers and BPOs. So don't just think dev, okay? Again, improved supplier relations. Why? Because, things get built faster, they get done, you get to perform, you look like a star, your suppliers, your partners think you're awesome, okay? It frees up management time because you get to, as Tony said, you're doing wireframes, you're doing things, you're having to do the prep, and then you're throwing it over the wall to your developers, they're working on it, and it's coming back to you. So it's actually quite useful. So that way you've got the time, you're not necessarily getting, as grandma would say, nickel and dimed to death all day long. Hey, I've got a question about this, I've got a question about that. I will, to Tony's point on doing wireframes and prepping, I will say that, and I'll show you in a slide, a couple slides up, one of the downsides to outsourcing is you've got to do the work. Okay, you don't have the guy sitting in the room with you where you can just whiteboard and draw squiggly lines and point at things and say, boom, magic, you get it? No, you actually have to do the work. So you've got to put that down on paper. You've got to do workflows. You've got to do wireframes because, we're geeks. Okay, if you ask us to think and don't give us direction, you are going to get a product that you don't want. Or isn't what you thought was in your head. Personally, I'm not a big fan of giant specs that are 97 pages long because what I write down and think is in my head and I put down, you read and you may get a slightly different picture. Again, back to not what I wanted. So there is some interaction. You do have to do some work. You've got to write the specs. You've got to do the workflows. But the last point on this slide, decrease operating costs. This is welcome to the gold in outsourcing, okay? I mentioned giant salaries here. When you are offshoring, it is so much less expensive. I lived in Asia for quite a while, 5 years working in the Philippines, and ran a very large development team there. And the labor rates were literally pennies on the dollar. So using the Philippines as an example, I can tell you that you're probably looking anywhere to 1/3 to 1/5 the cost of a developer here in the United States for similar skill sets. So all of a sudden, either as a startup, it made your life very affordable and you can actually hire somebody to do something, or if you're scaling up, now your team, for the same amount of money that you would spend, your team is multiple times larger, so you can probably get more done and move faster. So those are the things you're looking for there. When you are hiring folks, don't worry about, I get lots of questions on this, well, do I really want to offshore or don't I? What happens when I grow? It's easy to fold them into your team as you grow. If you want to build a large team here, as you raise money in multiple rounds and you get local funding and you get local developers and that kind of thing, it's easy to keep the team over there. They already know the code. They know the product. So bring in some senior level talent and, and they can then manage them. And they are a great resource to keep the engine running. Okay. And that's what you're looking for. A lot of the BPOs that you'll deal with, especially when I introduce you to Steve, some of the issues that run up, you had mentioned earlier, how do you protect your code? How do you keep it legal? This is why you use somebody like Steve, not necessarily from the managing code process, but they keep it legal. So that way people are getting paid, taxes are being paid, you've got an HR resource, things like that, okay? Last thing I'll say is you got a choice also on this. When you hire, are you getting hourly offshore folks or full-time offshore folks? If you get hourly offshore folks, yes, it is still cheaper than it is here in the United States. However, remember that the offshoring service is hiring that person full-time and then charging you an hourly rate. So they're charging you much more on an hourly rate than what they're paying in the toto when you do the math and divide out a yearly salary down to, because they're operating those types of situations. They're really operating much like an agency. You can go full-time. Full-time is what I personally prefer. You get the guy, it's always you, it's always the same guy, full-time employee, and there's no rotation of, well, that guy's on another project, let me get, you know, somebody else for you. And then they've got to come up to speed, they've got to learn the code, and those are issues, and not just time and impact, but it also has, you know, the quality of the code. So with that said, where do you go and outsource? Look, nice big picture of the world. You can go anywhere for the most part these days. There are geeks everywhere. There are pluses and minuses to all of it, okay? Do you want really low and really cheap? Great, welcome to Pakistan, welcome to Vietnam. Do you want somebody in your own time zone? Okay, you can go to South America. Welcome to, you know, Argentina. When I was at Intel, we ran large teams in Cordoba, Argentina. It was great. I got to fly there a lot and drink some wine. So business trips were always loved. But you know, the costs aren't as beneficial as they are somewhere else. Do you want somebody, say, in China? Very cheap. But as Tony mentioned, you've got IP problems, okay? Because China is like, wow, what's yours is mine. So enjoy. And then you get into places like the Ukraine. So you've got lots of interesting things. One of the most interesting things that you'll bump into as you traverse the world of offshoring is what the term ESL. English is a second language, okay? So I'll give you a very quick anecdote. I was running a very large team doing an asset management project when I was living in the Philippines, and we actually had outsourced some of it to a group in the Ukraine, and they had done the business analysts, BAs had, you know, digested different asset classes and told us all about the research on every different asset class, and we ran into an ESL problem. And my BA was this very smart woman who, no joke, used to be a nuclear engineer. Okay, PhD in nuclear engineering, and she could make more money being a BA in the Ukraine. So she left the power plant and was working for us. She had done great work on several different asset classes, including all kinds of weird things like derivatives and, you know, that kind of stuff. And so we started getting her onto some physical goods that we needed to track. And we gave her the project of, please, can you give us the definitions, go find us sources for, et cetera, for car models? Because we wanted to track an asset of your cars, car collections for really rich people. Week goes by, I get the data back, the full report, it's a bazillion pages because, you know, she is a nuclear engineer. And I'm looking through the report and something just doesn't look right. And so I dig deeper and I'm looking at the data. And so I figured, let me look for my car. Not there. A couple of years before it's there, a couple of years after it's there. So I dig even deeper. Make a long story short, we had an ESL problem. We had asked her to research car models. She researched model cars. So instead of every car that was out there, it was Corgi, it was Matchbox, it was Hot Wheels. So, you know, there was money, time, effort wasted, and we kind of had to go back. So be careful of that, which is one of the reasons why I, having lived in the Philippines and used the Philippines a lot, as well as folks everywhere else, one of the reasons why I personally really like developers in the Philippines. While there are other nations, India is a great example, that speak very good English, and they would tell you that they actually speak the proper English because they spell color and flavor with a U, and pronounce it aluminium. But one of the great things about the Philippines is that for many years, up until World War II, they were an American territory. So they have this wonderful understanding of Western nuance. Okay, so they understand things that we want to do. They understand product. Their school system was set up by the United States back in that time, so they had free public school, much like we do. Yeah, not all of it's great, much like we do. So you get some nuance. They understand season ticketing for basketball, so you could do those types of things. So the nuance is there, and you're really looking for a developer that understands that nuance, so that way you don't get a report on model cars. Okay, which takes us to preparing for outsourcing. What do you need to do? You know, you're depending upon the size of your organization, you're going to get some pushback. Obviously, in a small startup, no pushback because it's you and your partner, and you're going to say, this is what we're going to do. 4 people in the room. As the room gets a little bit larger with more folks, sure, you might get some pushback. Well, we're not going to get great stuff. How do we deal with the roles? How do we manage them? What do we do? What's the cost basis? Do we, you know, that kind of politicking. One of the things that we often do is, you know, in large organizations, is we start to chart it out and to do a matrix on what the benefits, the cost, you know, small, medium, and large. What's the benefits that you're going to get out of each category? And that oftentimes looks something like this. Okay, so what are you doing? How are you doing it? What's the impact? And, you know, what's the returning? What's the return value? So as you can see, you know, joint venture, captive, co-sourcing, spinoff, shoring. What is it? Look, low, strong, 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 you know, time to benefit. So what's your best return on the dollar? Where are you going to get the fastest product returned and out to you because you can afford to have more developers? What's the cost, you know, to you, the capitalization, et cetera. This is why I'm such a fan of offshore. Again, to Tony's point, I'm a geek, so I'm used to managing offshore folks, so I can do that. You will need the Tonys of the world, the me's, the hire, find somebody, a technical advisor to run it and to make sure. As I mentioned before, you're going to need to actually do the work. So what do? You're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to figure it out. You need to assess what you're doing now. Okay, you know, what's your baseline business? What's your benchmark expenses? What are other people paying for these types of development costs? You know, as Tony mentioned, interview your key stakeholders. What's the impact going to be? You need to workshop it. You need to define your target model, your sourcing strategy. What do you want to, you know, where are you going to go the next step? So that way you're prepared. As I always tell my guys, whether it be dealing with actual code or in strategy, play chess, not checkers. Okay, you need to be able to think multiple moves down the road. And when I talk to developers about this and my guys that I run, one of the ways I explain it is, look, we know that we're going to have to refactor code and we're going to have to redo things as the company grows, but you don't want to have to throw it all out all the time. That's a waste of money. So play chess, plan ahead. Because by putting in a little something now that might take an extra hour or two may gain you multiple hours or days down the road when that hook is there and available. Okay, and not have to throw out all the code and start over again. You know, what are you going to do? Identify your infrastructure. You know, how are you going to manage it? What's the impact to the organization going to be? Then if you're large enough, have that meeting. Start to talk about how you're going to implement these changes and get it going and roll it out. And when you look at the outsourcing model, okay, a lot of it's going to come from in-house. So the business requirements, the wireframing, the overall stuff that you need to do, look, that's your job. Okay, nobody understands your product better than you. Remember, I said it earlier, Tony said it as well. If you're looking for the engineers and the geeks in the world to design your product and to make it simple and easy, trust me, ain't gonna happen. Okay, you're not gonna get what you want. That's what a designer is for. Okay, we will build to that designer's design and we will make it pixel perfect. If you expect us to do that too, it's gonna be interesting. I I make no pretense to being a designer. I'm a much better editor than I am a creator. But as you can see in this slide, much of this in offshoring moves over towards the offshoring side of things, including these days deployment. Because of the new systems, the AWS, so on and so forth, deployment's going to be the other direction, because the developers will have a continuous integration, continuous build. They'll literally push a button, and once it passes code review, it'll go out and it'll get built. It'll get pushed to the cloud, and bing, bang, boom, it works like magic. And this is basically the flow chart of the process. So do the scope, do the work, think about it, send it to either the nearshore or the offshore people. It gets built, it goes through their QA, it comes back, you take a look at what it was that you wanted. Is it what you expected to be built? You're going to need a QA solution. Then you're going to do some, your own testing on it internally, because again, remember, you're throwing it over the wall. Something may be missed, some questions weren't answered, or you left design up to geeks. So, product use it, acceptance test it, play with it, do UAT, test it yourself. And if not, you go through the process again, you get the bugs fixed. And that's what happens. And that is how you build a team. A couple of the other things that I'll talk to you very quickly about building a team is when you are building the team, everybody goes, oh my God, how do I do it? It's an interview process, okay? I usually, when it's nearshore or offshore, the interview process for me usually entails 3 pieces, okay? It used to be easier pre-COVID, because one of the pieces is definitely easier face-to-face. So usually my process when interviewing developers is I have a conversation with them first. And each one of these 3 pieces has specific feedback, which is very valuable to give you the whole picture. So first, with your developers, you have a conversation. What do you do? How do you do it? What do you do when you're not in the office? What are your hobbies? And then you ask the funny questions that have no answer, like, how do you define success? Those types of things. What that does is it gives you the feedback on, is that developer going to work in your team? Okay. How do they fit with your team? How do they fit with you? Do you like them? I had a developer when I asked, do you have any questions for us? His only question was, what are your bathrooms like? Okay. Very interesting. Don't know why he asked that, but maybe that's a yellow flag for you, because maybe you've got really bad bathrooms. The next part is a test, because you want to see this guy's skill level. Okay. In the old days, when you could go face to face, you would literally give them a test. Everybody gets the same test. And this is where you compare apples to apples. Okay. And then you score that test and you deal with it. Well, offshoring, how do you give them that test? There are websites such as CoderByte, hacker websites that have defined tests. Sign up for it, pick what you want. They even have pre-canned questions that you can use in various languages to be able to ask if you're not technical, or your technical advisor will help you do this. So that way you can see their skill set. Okay. Again, the test is apples to apples. And then I usually make somebody whiteboard. And whiteboarding is solving a very simple but somewhat interesting problem. And whiteboarding isn't usually about getting the right answer. It's about watching their workflow and their thought process. Okay. Because what happens when because you give them a really simple little equation to solve, and you're looking for detail. You're looking what happens when they get stumped, and where do they go? Do they go down a rabbit hole and spin out of control, or do they answer it well? And that's how you define and pick a good developer. And then once you do that, then you're into the negotiations process. Do I like them? Yes. How much do I pay them? So on and so forth. And remember, a lot of offshore folks aren't familiar with, don't deal with, and don't necessarily require equity. Okay, I'm not saying be cheap, but they don't necessarily require equity. And if you treat offshores pretty well, kind of like we do employees here in the United States, You will find that you will get an employee who will run through walls for you. Because a lot of times in the offshoring world, whether it be, India, the Philippines, Pakistan, unfortunately, people are treated as a commodity. They are driven hard. They don't get, the work environment isn't pristine. So if you treat them well, if you find a good one and you treat them well, you will probably get great work. They will be unbelievably loyal to you, and they'll probably work harder and do more for you than a local guy would too. So that's what I have to say about offshoring, about finding and putting together a team. And with that, I turn it over. Yep, that's all of us. And with that, I turn it over to Steve Burns, who, like I said, I've worked with for a number of years now and has probably the best bespoke offshoring company that happens to be located in the Philippines. So, Steve, take it away.
Quite an introduction, Jim. That was highly informative. Hi, everyone. I guess for many of you, what I do will be might be a little bit difficult to understand if you're not familiar with the overall concept of outsourcing and therefore familiar with the differences, underneath kind of the arch of outsourcing. But as a brief background, my business is called ProSource. We are now entering our 7th year of business, having started with just one employee who was working for a California-based industrial services business in finance and accounting. To today, we are over 1,000 employees and close to 70 clients across 7 time zones. We work with a lot of tech companies and more particularly SaaS companies across the US, across Europe, Asia Pacific, and have a large number of clients also in Australia and New Zealand. And we build these technical distributed teams, both highly technical from software developers, QAs, data scientists, mobile engineers, Salesforce engineers, NetSuite consultants, and everything connected, as well as the non-technical resources, which Jim touched on, which often support those technical roles. They might be technical support, they might be implementation associates or advisors. They could be SDRs or BDMs selling your product to American consumers. They might be on the customer service side and customer support side, dealing with customers, both inbound and outbound, as well as kind of data entry and admin. Overall, we support about 50 different job titles for different clients. So there's really no limit to the possibilities of the resources that you can hire in the Philippines. Our model does work best for those businesses that already know who they are and know what they're doing. So you would already ideally have an onshore in the US or in Canada, wherever you may be, an onshore team, certainly a CTO in place, a technical lead, a delivery manager, and then the team that we build for you out in the Philippines really functions seamlessly as an extension of your business. I guess the best way to understand what we do is to think of an EOR, or an employer of record, or an employer on record. We are a platform in the Philippines that enables businesses to hire and to retain really great Filipino talent. So once we've hired the people for you, we then have a really extensive support team across wellness and people and culture and HR, which works really hard to make sure that the team we've hired for you, feels connected, feels engaged, and feels loved at a local level, so that they can do, really great work for you. So the relationship we have with our clients is very much like a partnership. It's not a set and forget model. We don't just hire people and then invoice you every month. It's very much about working together, making sure we're solving problems together, giving advice on team structure, on salaries, on working environment, and that sort of thing, to make sure you know, you get the outcomes and that you're able to hire really amazing Filipino talent. For those not familiar with the Philippines, we are a very large English-speaking population. I think it's the second or third largest in the world after obviously the US and I think Africa. The outsourcing or offshoring market here is fairly mature, having started about 15 years ago with just customer service. It's matured into a destination where you can hire effectively a wide variety of roles. We now have more than 50% of all of the Fortune 500 have a significant presence in the Philippines. And you might be interested to know that JP Morgan fairly recently broke a record in the Philippines for the largest single real estate transaction to house, you know, their 15 or 18,000 employees. So there's a lot of opportunity here to build out teams. In terms of the cost saving, although that really shouldn't be the primary driver, it should really be about access to talent. Of course, a byproduct of hiring in a developing country is the lower salary costs. And what you'll find is a saving broadly across salaries in the region of about 50%. And that might look like, you know, a saving of 30% on the more senior technical roles and a saving of 60 or 70% on the more junior technical or non-technical roles. But overall, the possibilities in the Philippines never cease to improve. And it's a very, very interesting market for businesses that are looking essentially for, you know, an unfair talent advantage. I think that's the best way to put it. I could go on. I could talk all day about what we do. I'm happy to answer any questions either over this forum or if people want to email me separately. We're very much an open book.
Well, one thing I'll ask you, Steve, I'll prompt you for it. One of the reasons that I find Steve very refreshing is I mentioned that a lot of times you're paying hourly or dealing with somebody, a tech. So Steve, why don't you talk about your setup and how you guys operate, which, like I said, unbelievably refreshing in the offshoring world.
Sure, absolutely. So my background previously was in more traditional outsourcing. And a few years back, my business partner and I got together and thought that there must be a better way to provide this service where clients would get real value and could actually scale, you know, significant teams and do a lot more than just low-level development work and bug fixes. We wanted to create an environment where businesses could hire really much bigger teams that could do much greater work. So we created a new model, and that model is, the financial model is essentially just a fixed management fee per employee per month, and then the salary and the benefits are a pass-through cost. So what that encourages is for us to find you, you know, the very best people for the role. We make no money on the employee's salary. There's no margin there. So there is no incentive for us to find you more expensive people. There's no incentive for us to try to push down the employees' salaries and get people in on much kind of cheaper terms, which often leads to attrition. So it's very much transparent. It's about finding you the best people, hiring those people on a full-time permanent basis. So everybody is hired on a bespoke basis. If a client comes to us and says, we need to hire 50 software engineers this quarter, we have a dedicated recruitment team that goes to the market and sources those candidates specifically for that job. The candidates are then hired to work for that business, and they are looking to develop a career with that business. We never move employees or engineers between clients. We don't have a bench of engineers that we can just roll out from project to project. We literally just build these teams from scratch, and they work dedicated and exclusively as any of your full-time direct employees would.
And Steve, because you're hiring great talent, you've got your own workspace, an office space in Makati, in the heart of Manila. For developers, what's your retention rate?
So our retention rate is extremely high. And maybe I can just talk a little bit about the building as well, just to put it into context. So
Please.
We have a, yeah, so we have a 20-story office building in the heart of the central business district of Makati. We have 13 floors of office space. Each floor is about 6,800 square feet. And we have 2 floors of amenities where we have some crazy stuff. We have a gym and fitness center. We have a sauna and cold plunge, a wellness library, a karaoke room, breakout rooms, roof deck, and games room. We've done all of this because we're very much an employer of choice in the Philippines. We've created an aspirational environment for employees. And all of this enables us to hire really great people and also to retain really great people.
Beautiful. Any questions?
Have you had issues with clients at some point quitting, and now you are facing the issue of having personnel that doesn't have employment, at least from that client?
No, that's not an issue we face. So we generally work with fairly large businesses. We also have some, we work with quite a few startups, but the bulk of our clients have raised Series A funding. Generally, that's anywhere from $20 to $50 million. And we've also worked with 14 public companies. So most of the people we work with, most of the companies we work with are growing fairly substantial teams with us. We do also work with a lot of new tech companies and new startups, hire 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. We're never in a situation where we're left kind of with the employees, because if we've hired employees for a business and the business says, hey, look, there's been a change of direction, we've lost our funding, we're pivoting, whatever it might be, we no longer need these resources in the Philippines, then we wind that down slowly. The employees are then paid out and the account is closed. I have to say, in 7 years of business, that hasn't happened, touch wood, but that's how that would roll out, if that answers your question.
Okay, yes.
I just had a quick question about the pay. We had just discussed in the room about how there might not be extra compensation besides the salary. So, but the question I had though was about hourly versus now. It sounds like almost all your employees are full time. So, is there still an option for an hourly person for instance, if somebody here doesn't have the funding for a full-time, they have to pay the part-time CTO, and they can only bring in a developer part-time also. So is that?
No, we don't provide that. And the main reason we don't provide that, and we used to many years ago, we went through a stage of offering part-time and kind of more project-based hiring and resourcing. But the problem you have with that in the Philippines is that being a software developer in the Philippines is a very aspirational role. That individual often will be the first individual in their family that may have graduated college, that may have really, chosen and stuck to a very promising career. The reason they've done that is to ensure that they have a full-time job, and that full-time job provides them with all of the benefits that a full-time job provides in the Philippines. So when you try to find people in the Philippines to work on a part-time basis, you're left with a very small pool of talent who are open to it. And anybody that accepts a part-time hourly based job is just doing so out of desperation. And as soon as they get a full-time gig, they jump ship. So it's really, really difficult to find good resources just to work on an hourly basis. Now, if your requirement is just for a few hours a week for some coding or to help out with some sprints from time to time, this working with a business like us would not be the right approach. You'd be much better off, as Jim said earlier, with finding kind of freelancers online, vetting them and engaging them on an hourly basis. But when you get to the position where you have an MVP or you've got your funding and you're ready actually to hire full-time engineers, that you have enough work and you also have the leadership locally to be able to manage them effectively, then that's the time to work with a business like ProSource.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Beautiful. Well, if no other questions, I would probably bring this to a close and thank Tony and Steve for showing up. Apologize for me going way longer than I thought I would. I did exactly what Tony said not to do, which is talk too much. So there you have it. I'm around here locally. Tony also around locally, and Len and everybody knows how to get with because we are affiliated in different ways with the Preccelerator. So we thank you for coming. If there are any questions afterwards, I'm going to be hanging around, and obviously Len is always available. So thanks to my friends and team, and thanks to you guys for showing up, both in person and online.
Thanks, Jim, and good luck, everyone. Wish you all the best.
Thank you. Same to you, all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everyone.